Hi there and welcome to our channel. Today we're going to be telling you a short story about Santa Claus. Once upon a time, Santa Claus was happily married to Mrs. Claus and they lived together at the North Pole, where Santa would prepare for his annual journey delivering presents to children all around the world. But one day, Santa started to feel restless and unhappy in his marriage. He found himself craving excitement and adventure, and before he knew it, he was cheating on Mrs. Claus with a woman named Jessica. Jessica was young, beautiful, and full of life, and Santa couldn't resist her charms. He would sneak out at night to meet her, leaving Mrs. Claus at home alone, not knowing what her husband was up to. Mrs. Claus had been feeling suspicious for some time now. She knew that something wasn't quite right with Santa, and she was determined to get to the bottom of it. So one night, when Santa thought she was asleep, she followed him as he sneaked out of their home at the North Pole. She tiptoed behind him as he made his way to Jessica's house, her heart heavy with the weight of her suspicions. When Santa and Jessica disappeared inside, Mrs. Claus waited outside, listening for any sounds of what was happening inside. Suddenly, she heard a loud crash and a shout from inside the house. She quickly pushed open the door and rushed inside, only to find Santa and Jessica tangled up in a pile of broken ornaments, with tinsel and mistletoe strewn everywhere. "Santa Claus!" Mrs. Claus exclaimed, her eyes wide with shock and disbelief. "What in the world are you doing?" Santa looked up at her sheepishly, his face flushed with embarrassment. Well, you see, Mrs. Claus. I was just helping Jessica with her Christmas decorations." Mrs. Claus stared at him for a moment, before bursting out into laughter. "Oh Santa, you always did have a terrible sense of humor. And a worse sense of timing." She helped Santa and Jessica up off the floor, still chuckling to herself. "Well, I suppose it's a good thing I came along to save you from yourselves. Let's get you two cleaned up and back to the North Pole before any more mishaps happen." And with that, Mrs. Claus led Santa and Jessica out of the house, shaking her head at the absurdity of the situation. But Santa's secret didn't stay hidden for long. Mrs. Claus soon found out about his infidelity, and she was devastated. She confronted Santa and demanded that he end things with Jessica and return to their marriage. At first, Santa refused to give up Jessica and the thrill of their forbidden relationship. But then, something unexpected happened. Jessica revealed to Santa that she was actually an undercover detective, and she had been using her relationship with him to gather evidence against him for a crime he had committed years ago. Suddenly, Santa realized that he had been betrayed by the one person he thought he could trust, and he was filled with regret for what he had done to Mrs. Claus. He ended things with Jessica and returned to his wife, vowing to never cheat on her again. And from that day on, Santa and Mrs. Claus lived happily ever after, with Santa dedicating himself to making up for his mistake and becoming the best husband he could be. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this.